Welcome all you ghosts and ghoulies to the very first episode of Conjuring Canvases. My name is Lern, the Conjurer, and I am your host. Get what I did there? Our show is where spooky art is created and terrifying tales are told. This show and channel was inspired by Robert Welsh's Ghost Stories and Makeup Mondays. I highly recommend his channel. It's amazing and a lot of spooky fun. And if you're interested in watching him, I will make sure to link him in the show notes. In each episode, I do paint live for you a particular paranormal subject matter. It is my honor to begin this first episode with a subject that is near and dear to my cold, chilly heart, and that is the Hatman. So, of course, if we are doing the Hatman, I decided to dress as my rendition of the Hatman, hence my hat and my spooky demeanor. If you would like to see the full look of my costume for this episode, feel free to follow our Instagram at Conjuring Canvases for the whole look. Before each episode, I do like to give a special shout out to either a product, a person, or just a really cool spooky thing. What I'm gonna scream out to is a special podcast, one that's near and dear to my heart, called BSP. This stands for Believer Skeptic Podcast, and they call themselves an LBGT paranormal comedy podcast. And of course, they're all about the spooky stuff. They were a big inspiration to me as well as Robert Welsh. So I highly recommend you giving them a follow and listening to some of their very creepy episodes. Support spooky. It should be noted by all of you ghosts and ghoulies that I am not an expert in any of these paranormal subjects, nor am I an expert in art. I really am just doing this channel because I think spooky stuff is really fun, and I think you think the same. But hopefully you enjoy what I bring to you today, as well as what we talk about. Let's go ahead and begin. I've already laid out my paints, so let's talk about the Hatman. I like to go ahead and sketch out exactly what I'm doing on the canvas first, before I just paint freely. I am not that talented. But what I like to do is I'll sketch it out and then I'll outline it. Of course, if you want any information on the exact paints that I used, remember to check the show description. Now, personally, I've only just learned about the Hatman. I do know a few things about him, but there are a lot of resources out there that you can definitely look into to learn more about this very, very creepy dude. Of course, the word Hatman sounds pretty easy to understand. It's a man in a hat. But what exactly is the Hatman? Well, if you're someone who already knows about the Hatman, you're probably screaming at the screen right now saying he is a shadow guy and he is not good news, which is correct. If you are a viewer that suffers from sleep paralysis, you might have heard of or seen the Hatman. Now, I am not a sufferer of sleep paralysis, which I'm very thankful to say, but I do know plenty of people who are, in fact, sufferers of sleep paralysis, and this is a very real phenomenon that happens to a lot of people. Now, of course, sleep paralysis is no fun. Basically, the long and short of sleep paralysis is you wake up while your mind is awake, however your body is not. So basically, you're in this state of consciousness where you cannot move, but your mind wants you to move. And of course, the mind is capable of some very interesting things, so you start to hallucinate things, or at least that's what researchers of sleep paralysis say. Now, the interesting thing about sleep paralysis and the Hatman is that according to many documentaries, many books, many resources, and a lot of Reddit posts, there are thousands, if not millions of people who around the world who have witnessed the Hatman, and they all describe him the same way. Now, of course, you probably can't see quite yet in my canvas because, of course, we're just doing the outline right now. And you're probably like, wow, that outline is real thick, Lern. How are you going to make that nice? Patience. Patience. Now, while there are different descriptions of exactly what he's wearing, when it comes down to his hat, or if he's wearing a suit, or if he's wearing a trench coat, whatever it is, the one thing that is very constant is the fact that he is in fact covered in a shadow, hence shadow person. So that means that when a lot of people have claimed to see him, they don't really see a face. Instead, they see what looks like a person, however, he's just an entirely black silhouette. Now, you might be thinking, well, this is a product of sleep paralysis, and your mind is in fact playing tricks on you, it's probably just exactly that, a trick of the mind. But how do we explain that so many people have seen him and the same exact description is from these witnesses? It's just a very interesting phenomenon that doesn't quite make sense. Now, there is a lot of people out there who will claim that the Hatman is kind of like the boss of all the shadow people. Depending upon your research, you might learn that there are multiple types of shadow people. In my research, I've learned there's at least 7 of them. 7. I know. To the people who have seen Hatman's face, they usually describe a very long, very gaunt face. So that's basically what I'm trying to do here. Now, they also describe a very wide, very creepy smile. So what I'm doing is I'm giving him a very long, very wide smile. And also when we do get into the details, you'll see that I'm giving him very sharp teeth and basically no lips. So just terrifying in all togetherness. Now, another thing is that most people claim that they don't see his eyes or they don't see his face at all. But if they do see his face, instead of seeing actual eyeballs, what they see is 2 red glowing eyes. So of course, what I promised in the type of layout of this show is that I would provide to you some resources, some origin stories, some history about the paranormal entity that we are covering. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to list off to you just a few things that I discovered from local researchers. Which, can I just say, if I had the job of paranormal researcher, I would feel like I would be the most popular person at a party. Or maybe not. Now, if you were looking for actual published works about the Hatman, which, yes, there is actual published works out there about the Hatman. What a time to be alive. The first reference that I could give you is a book authored by the very talented Heidi Hollis. Her book is titled The Hatman, The True Stories of Evil Encounters. Very terrifying stuff, I can tell you that. Now, the stories that I chose for today's episode are not from her book. I think that you can very well go out and read that yourself because, woo, talk about terrifying. But it's a very interesting book. Definitely gives you a lot of the heebie-jeebies. Again, it's very interesting that these are all encounters that talk about the same exact thing. A second thing that I would recommend looking into is the Hatman Project, which is an actual documentary about the Hatman. Now, the Hatman Project is on Amazon Prime, so if you are a member of Amazon Prime, you can watch it for free. There is also another documentary that talks about sleep paralysis, and it is called The Nightmare. The Nightmare was previously on Netflix. It is no longer there now. However, you can find it on Amazon Prime. You'll just have to pay a small rental fee in order to watch it. However, it is absolutely worth the watch. It is fascinating, and it talks about sleep paralysis and what happens to people. And of course, it does talk about the Hatman. Right, so the Hatman has already been described as a man wearing a wide-brimmed hat, some kind of a long duster, trench coat, or even a suit, and has always been described as a shadow man, or has sometimes been described as the gray man. So depending upon where you're researching, that is technically the same term for him. However, the Hatman has typically been called from sleep paralysis victims or people that have been sleeping, they wake up in the middle of the night and they're perfectly fine, but they see him at the edge of their bed or in their bedroom. Another thing that most people say that have witnessed the Hatman have said that they've seen him after using a Ouija board. Let's just go ahead and cut this episode just a brief moment. I don't judge you ghosties and ghoulies. You do whatever you want. As long as you are being safe, you're not a murderer, you're not doing anything bad, whatever it is, just be a good person, right? Mama Learn is telling you, why are you gonna use a spirit board? Why are you gonna use a Ouija board? Don't do it. Have you seen a horror movie? It doesn't end up well, does it? And you know, I get it. I understand. As a witch, I understand that some people like to conjure spirits in order to find out information, hence seances. But I'm telling you now, girlfriend, or ghoul friend, or ghost friend, whoever you are, I'm here to tell you, I don't think it's worth it, and I don't think you should do it, because it never ends well. If your story ended well after using a Ouija board or a spirit board, please email me, because I would love to know. But no judgments here, I just want you to be safe. But back to the episode. Basically, people who say that they've used Ouija boards have also witnessed the Hatman. But here's another thing. Some people have also claimed that they've seen the Hatman after being abducted by aliens. So, talk about a twist, right? I'm just gonna go in and start detailing some small areas, but we'll keep talking. So, the Hatman has also been called sort of like a omen of sorts. Typically people have claimed that if you see the Hatman, it's because bad things are about to happen or bad things are happening. I have met a few people who have claimed to see the Hatman, and usually it's after a bad breakup, after having a terrible fight with someone they love. It's usually brought on by something that's not very nice, not very fun. Most shadow people, according to my research, adore going after people who put out negative energy. So the best thing that you can do right off the bat to fight a shadow person, to fight the Hatman, is to try your best to be positive. Try your best. I don't know if anyone's met him and tried to kill him with kindness, but maybe you gotta throw a teddy bear at him. Another idea that if he is such a bad omen, another idea is that if you see him, it might mean that someone is about to die, or someone is about to be diagnosed with a terrible condition, such as cancer, something incurable, you know, that kind of a thing. So overall, not a fun time. Not a good omen to see. Not a Hallmark card, let me tell you. If this was a Hallmark card, I'd run screaming for the hills. Now, another reason why some people have witnessed the Shadow Man is because of self-inflicted reasons, such as taking hallucinogens. Now, you might be thinking, well, I have been taking shrooms and I've never seen the Hatman. Maybe you haven't seen the Hatman, and good for you. But some people take things that are very big on the hallucinogen realm, such as taking a lot of Benadryl, for example. Methamphetamines, things like that, are definitely going to heighten your sense of awareness, but also going to show you a lot of hallucinogen properties. So, of course, a great way to not see a shadow person and not see the Hatman is don't do drugs, kids. I want to make his skin like nice and gray, so I think I'm gonna mix in some white in here. Another thing that Heidi Hollis talks about in her book, she talks about how the Hatman is a minion of the devil, or is the devil incarnate. Now, I don't really know how much I believe that. I'm not saying that she's wrong, but I am saying that there is a lot to be said when you say that something is the devil, right? That's a pretty heavy accusation. But I do know that quite a few people who have claimed to see the Hatman also believe the same thing, that he is actually the devil. So pretty terrifying. Speaking of devil, demons, all that, if you also found in your own personal research the demons named Moloch, I think that's how it's pronounced, Moloch. He is basically the demon god of war, child sacrifice, fire, lots of not good stuff, okay? So a lot of people say that he is him just in our physical realm of humans. I want to give him a little bit of a dark red color, so I think that's what I'm going to mix. Now, the Hatman project, what I found to be very interesting was there were a few people that they covered in the project who claimed to see the Hatman during the day. There are a lot of people who see the Hatman only at night, which is already pretty terrifying, but imagine being out on a bright sunny day and seeing this terrifying thing at you. That is creepy as hell. So I highly recommend the project. I highly recommend watching it, especially if you are someone who has seen the Hatman, you know someone who's seen the Hatman. Very well, someone's story might resonate with you. Now, before we get into the stories, I do want to go ahead and cover what sleep paralysis is. According to my research, which will be located at the bottom in our show notes, sleep paralysis does talk about the state of a human being between sleep and awake. Now, there are a few things that you can do if you are someone who suffers from sleep paralysis to essentially get you out of it. Now, I realize that if you are someone who goes through sleep paralysis and you're terrified and you're seeing something like a Hatman coming at you, you're not going to really think logically. But there are a few tips, such as before going to bed, don't eat anything that has caffeine or drink anything that has caffeine in it. So try to limit your caffeine take before you go to sleep. Another big thing that experts recommend is for you to understand what is happening. So for you to logically say in your brain, hey, I'm going through sleep paralysis right now, body, like, know that this is not real, snap out of it. That's one of the easiest things that you can do. Another thing is to try to concentrate on a small muscle movement. Because if you try to move your entire body, chances are you're not going to get nowhere, right? Let's give them some big red eyes. So that's another thing that we'll notice, is that some people who say that they see his eyes, they just see those. I promise they'll look better. Ultimately, I'm going to end my research sum up to you, just as someone who's never seen the Hatman before, to where if you're a ghostie or ghoulie and you're watching this and you have seen the Hatman and you have a story about the Hatman, please email it to me to conjuringcanvases@gmail.com. I would love to share it with everyone else on the show so that we can get your story out there and continue to learn how to fight these bad entities. Okay, so before we start the stories, I wanted to let everybody know that picking these stories for the Hatman was incredibly difficult. I mean, everyone out there seems to have almost the same exact experience, but I picked ones that had very interesting little caveats. So I have made sure to credit each person that I did find the story from. Hopefully, if you're a watcher, I hope you enjoy how I depicted it. So let's go ahead, listen to some stories, and I'll get to painting this Hatman.
This story comes to us from Redditor Deleted. I saw the Hatman, and I didn't know who he was until probably 2 years ago. I am currently 30 years old. I vividly recall being in a laundromat with my mom. It was a bright sunny day, literally in the middle of the daytime. It was the very early 90s, and I couldn't have been more than 3 or 5 years old. I was old enough to form simple sentences. A lot of people say that you don't have memories of being that young, and most people don't believe me when I say that I do. Though, of course, they're usually fuzzy, and there are few and far between. However, this memory that I am about to tell is something that I've never forgotten, and it has haunted me my entire life. It is the longest and most vivid memory I have from being so little. I've never even told this story to my mom, and she was there. So we're at the laundromat, and I had this obsession with a Pac-Man arcade machine that they had there. Usually, I just stand there in the doorway and watch the demo screen do its thing. But sometimes there was someone sitting there playing it. One time, however, there was a man standing at the machine with a quarter. The man was entirely black. And I'm not talking about the color of his skin. I do not recall any distinguishing features of this man, other than the fact that he had a hat that was not quite a top hat and not quite a cowboy hat. And he had a long duster trench coat. I could see the man clearly, and he was standing right in front of me, taller than the arcade machine. He had his arms stretched out, and he was turning the quarter from side to side in a luring manner. In a, see? This is shiny. This is shiny. Come get it. I know you want to play the machine. No sooner that I had taken one step forward, my mother had called me. The man jerked his head up, looked into the direction of my mother, then looked at the arcade machine, dropped the quarter into the slot, turned around, and left, all within the span of probably 2 to 3 seconds. Now, I get that I'm not being able to remember his features other than him being this all-black 3D silhouette can easily be explained away by degrading memory, false memories, and any number of reasonable explanations. However, I still remember the layout of the laundromat. I remember exactly where I was standing, and the features that were all around me. I remember the color of the walls, and the blue, narrow border trim. I even remember where the door to the laundromat was, right beside the Pac-Man arcade machine. I vividly recall every single detail of this memory. This man had no features, except for his hat and his duster trench coat. His hand was stretched out to me, and he did not have a skin color. He did not have eyes. He did not have a face. He was nothing but a pitch-black void of terror for my childhood. I thought for years that I had almost been kidnapped, and every now and then I would think back on this memory and wonder how my life would have changed if that had happened. Then I read about the Hatman on here, and I shit you not, every hair on my body stood up on end because I suddenly realized I was almost abducted by a fucking paranormal entity that preys on children. I've had several paranormal encounters through my life, ranging from being as young as 10 and just a few years ago. I I don't know if I'm more horrified by finding out about the Hatman or by thinking I was almost abducted by a deranged degenerate.
Yeah, I gotta tell you, I don't know what I would do if in the middle of the day in a laundromat, which is already terrifying as it is. Like, I don't know if you've been to a laundromat, but laundromats are pretty fucking scary. And I only say that because laundromats, in my opinion, like, come off like they're always in, like, a gray scale. And everything around is, like, kind of like having, like, a weird static feedback noise. But yeah, like, I feel like laundromats in general are kind of terrifying. And if you're, like, in the laundromat with your mom, you're a baby, and all of a sudden there's some dude who's taller than the freaking Pac-Man machine, and he's like, hey, wanna come play this game?
This story comes to us from the Redditor Cody the Fox 96. I've met the Hatman. When I saw the title, every hair on my body stood up and my blood went cold. I hadn't thought about the Hatman in years, and I repressed the memory. It started with me having sleep paralysis, which has never been an unusual thing for me. Had it my whole life. What was odd, though, was that some of these things that I had hallucinated during the sleep paralysis remained changed after I was able to move. Normally, I'd brush this off as having hallucinated, and the change was actually my brain shifting things back into reality. But when it was my light turning on, which I knew I had turned it off, or my television turning into static and the volume raising to the max, it started to really begin to bother me. It continued like this for a few weeks, but then I started hearing footsteps marching up and down the hallways outside my bedroom. I'd brush it off as paranoia, sleep deprivation, or whatever could cause stuff like that. Except my parents complained about me marching in the hall all night, pausing and breathing heavily at their closed door. We all started seeing shadow people out of the corners of our eyes. Stuff would go missing and reappear in odd places. All kinds of strange things. I'm talking the cordless landline in the oven. Plates all out of the cupboards and stacked on the counters precariously. Then, the sleep paralysis started involving the shadow people. I woke, frozen, unable to even open my eyes. I could move them to look around my room. The shadow people surrounded me. Everything was red, like there was a floodlight casting blood red everywhere. The shadow people parted, and the Hatman walked up. He was much, much taller than the rest of them, blacker than black. It seemed as if light just stopped, and where he was a void, except where his eyes should have been. They were glowing red and staring at me. I felt everything go cold. My vision faded to gray except for him. My eyes were locked with his. I felt intense and searing hatred coming from him, and I felt like he wanted nothing but to make me suffer. I felt like I was dying, with this horrible sense of doom, foreboding, hopelessness, despair, all the absolute and most aching and deeply painful emotions, all at once, and in the highest intensity I'd ever felt in my life, before or since. I felt my eyes roll back. The world went black for what felt like a second, and I snapped awake 7 hours later in the living room, on the floor, with my parents both out of the house and not knowing what the fuck happened. I screamed. My house felt wrong. Everything looked the same, but it felt like the house was trying to consume me. I ran from the house in my pajamas, not even grabbing my cell phone, and ran to my neighbor's house. They were sitting in their backyard. The wife, who we call R, saw me and got up to meet me, seeing something was clearly wrong. I called my mother, who rushed home from the grocery store. In the meantime, I had to sit with my neighbor. I relayed to her what had been going on, and when I had got to what happened, she stopped me and said she didn't want to hear anything more. She said she was beginning to feel sick, like they were all being watched as I talked about it. We waited for my mother to get home, and then we went inside. She stopped and said, "Something is wrong. The basement stairs lights, which is directly across from the front door, where the basement entrance is, flicked on, then off. And then we heard footsteps coming up the stairs. Thing is, the light switch is at the top of the stairs. Nobody was there to have flickered it. And now there was someone walking up the stairs right towards us. My mother pushed me back and closed the door. We had a breezeway with a door that had a window leading to the kitchen. We still hear the footsteps coming up, and the sound of the boots on the tile leading to us, but there was nobody there. And then directly in front of the glass, Hatman was glaring directly in my mother's face, and we both absolutely panicked and ran out of the house. After all that went down, I started doing heavy research on this topic, and I found that the Hatman was something other people had dealt with as well. I was spurred to do this by the fact that my neighbor had given it a name. I've experienced other paranormal stuff in my life, but nothing was ever dramatic or as horrible as dealing with whatever Hatman is. I hope I never have to deal with it again.
So I chose to do just a little more while we were listening to stories. I added more detail over into the coat. I definitely finished out the hat area and the mask. I want to make these eyes a lot more brighter, and then I'm going to be working on the background. So as we listen to our last couple of stories, that's what I'll be working on.
Our final story is brought to us by Redditor Daniel Vezanovic. It's December, my favorite month of the year. There are only a few days left until Christmas. My parents and I finally finished decorating the house. All exhausted, I went to bed much earlier than usual. A gentle fire kept my room warm. It was mostly dark, except for one part of the room that was lit by streetlights. I went to bed and fell asleep very quickly. I'm not sure exactly how much time had passed when I started to hear footsteps in the hall. I ignored them at first because I had thought it was one of my parents. And then they got louder and louder as they approached my room. The door from my room slowly opened and then closed. There was a silence. Silence that can only be heard in a cemetery. It got freezing, which was very weird, knowing that the fire could burn at least until 4 a.m. Although sleepy, I slowly opened my eyes, and that's when I saw him. A big black figure standing next to my bed. He had a black coat and a black hat. I thought he was a thief and tried to call my parents, but I couldn't. I was paralyzed. He moved his hand from my leg upwards. I could feel his nails, which were like sharp knives, like 5 very sharp knives that could cause me a fatal injury every second. He slowly approached, more and more, until he finally reached my chest. He paused. I tried to see his face, but couldn't. It looked like some kind of a shadow, just a lot darker. It reached my chest, and I began to breathe quickly with the fear that I felt. And then I felt like I was running out of air. It's like I'm choking. I thought that was it, that it's over. I wanted to try one last time to get out of those icy hands. I mustered all my strength and somehow managed. I shouted my parents' names as loud as I could. Before my parents came, I saw him slowly disappear into the darkness of my room. I told my parents what had happened, but of course, they didn't believe me. Probably no one else would believe me if I told them. After being unable to recover for days, my parents took me to my mom's friend, Dr. Jack. He is one of the best psychiatrists in our city. He told me it was just a dream in which my mind was awake but my body was still asleep, also known as sleep paralysis. It happens to other people at least once during their life, he said in a reassuring voice. He even managed to repeat it. This time, before that creature grabbed me, Dr. Jack woke me up. You see, it's all in your head. You have nothing to fear. But if you want, you can come to my therapy and we'll solve it together. That's what I did. I went to therapy every day for 2 weeks. After that, I had almost forgotten about it. Almost. Some time had passed until I had accidentally come across a picture of that thing on the internet. I did a little research and found that many people had seen it, some even several times. The Hatman wrote on every picture I saw. Nobody knows who he is and what he wants, but one thing is for sure, that no one is safe. He can lurk out of the shadows and just wait for the right moment to attack. The moment I read that, I felt again the same cold that I had felt a long time ago. Someone was looking at me. I slowly turned my head around until I eventually saw him. He was standing at the other end of my room, waving at me. He's waving. He waved at me until he disappeared into the dark again. It looks like he's gone for now, but I'm sure of one thing. This certainly will not be the last time the two of us have seen each other.
What a great story to finish this awesome episode. And we have a finished product, ladies and gentlemen. Here she is, the Hatman. Thank you so much for tuning in to our very first episode of Conjuring Canvases. We hope that you enjoyed. Please remember to like and subscribe, comment below. Look us up on all of our social media by searching for Conjuring Canvases on all of the things. And finally, remember the rules of conjuring. Never play alone. Never play in a graveyard, and always say goodbye. Goodbye, ghosties and ghoulies.